On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to look at chapter 20 of John's Gospel. Chapters 19 and 20 are the pivotal point of all of history. Everything revolves around the crucifixion and resurrection. But I want you to notice that our Savior's resurrection is inexorably connected to his crucifixion. Crucifixion without resurrection would simply not be enough. Gary Stim is here to discuss with me the resurrection of Christ.
And J.R., this is an important moment, perhaps the most important historical moment in the history of the world, and it begins the first day of the week. That's John chapter 20, verse 1. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. First day of the week.
Yes.
Yes, that's important.
Now I want you to notice that chapter 19 ends in darkness, but chapter 20 ends with sunrise. We have in chapter 19 the sun going out at noonday and the light of the world being snuffed out. But here we have the resurrection, and they buried him at sunset, but he rose again at sunrise. And I'm reminded of Malachi's promise, "But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of righteousness arise with healing in his wings." And this is what we're seeing here. Brightness. For every dark, dismal difficulty that we suffer in this world, we have the blessed hope that one day we shall rise again. What a glorious daybreak that's going to be. And so I like the song, Some Golden Daybreak. And all the other songs about resurrection seem to have, "I'll meet you in the morning," just inside the Golden Gate.
Absolutely.
And all of these, the cloudless day, you remember that song? All of these wonderful songs that we have. Everything revolves around the fact that resurrection comes as the sun comes up. The sun's rising is a picture of resurrection. So Gary, let's talk about the resurrection and how it is so connected to the crucifixion, and how without it, the Apostle Paul said we would be of all men most miserable.
Well, you have said it yourself, John chapter 19, dark chapter. The sun was extinguished. John chapter 20, the sun is rising on the first day of the week. And J.R., that has become the point of contention throughout the history of the church. Is there really such a thing as the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ? Did it really happen? Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15:12, "Now if Christ be preached that he rose from the dead, how say some among you that there is no resurrection from the dead?" Paul pinpointed this question, and it became a centerpiece of his teaching, the resurrection of Christ. It is so meaningful to us because it gives us the opportunity to say, the way Jesus went through this world, resurrected into heaven, that's exactly the way we're all going to go as we follow him.
And he wrote to Titus, the Apostle Paul wrote to Titus, that this is the blessed hope. The hope of resurrection. So when you leave the cemetery and leave that loved one behind lying in a casket out there amidst the grass and the dirt, you don't have to go away hopeless, knowing that one of these days we shall rise again. And by the way, Gary, this is evident throughout nature. Let's talk about that for just a moment. In the autumn season, the leaves fall, but in the spring, the trees come to life again. That's a picture of resurrection, built into creation itself.
Built into creation is the idea of resurrection. Resurrection is sort of the outgrowth of the whole process of replication. You stop and think about the insect world. The insects spin little cocoons and they overwinter and they look like they're dead.
Yes.
But then come spring, you find out they're not dead.
Yeah, and that worm comes to life as a butterfly.
That's right.
Isn't that amazing?
It is.
And then in ancient Egypt, the scarab beetle was observed to dig a hole and go in and cover it up. But sometime later, that hole would be opened up and thousands of little beetles would come out. And so the Egyptians believed that that was spontaneous generation. And so the scarab beetle became the symbol of resurrection and was counted among their gods. Isn't that amazing? Then there's the seed that's planted
Yes.
and then comes forth with new life. It all teaches resurrection.
Everything points to the resurrection, and even, by the way, J.R., the 7 feasts of Israel point to the resurrection, because Christ is called our Passover, but he's also referred to as the first fruits.
Yes. In 1 Corinthians 15, he is called the first fruits. It says, Christ is risen from the dead, has become the first fruits of them that slept. In other words, he's the first one of a bunch of us who are going to be resurrected.
Yes.
Because he rose again, we have the blessed hope that we too shall rise again someday. And Gary, that means then that there is something to this life that God has planted within us that is going to return to these bodies, however decayed they might be, and some kind of a renewal. Just as the seed falls in the ground and dies, it germinates eventually and comes to life again. We don't know exactly how this is going to happen, but it is absolutely true. Every man in his own order, Christ the first fruits, and afterward they that are Christ's at his coming.
Now let's talk about the actual resurrection of Christ in terms of the way it played out during that Passover week so long ago. J.R., Jesus was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. How do we reconcile this with the festival?
Well, you know, Jesus said that in Matthew, I think it's chapter 12, as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, so must the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. And because of this, there's some who've considered a Wednesday. They suggest a Wednesday crucifixion. Mm-hmm. Others have suggested a Thursday crucifixion. But traditionally, the church, or Christianity, has believed in a Friday crucifixion with a Sunday morning resurrection. Now, I realize that presents a problem with the 3 days and 3 nights. However, it is said that the Jews regard, in ancient Judaism, regard any part of a day as a day. And so on Sunday evening, when Jesus met the disciples on the road, or the 2 disciples walked with them along the road to Emmaus, and he began to question them. They didn't know who he was, but they did say, today is the 3rd day since these things were done. So if Sunday was the 3rd day, then Friday was evidently the 1st day.
Well, in the 15th chapter of Mark, verse 42, the burial took place toward evening on the day before the Sabbath, as it is written in Mark. And then in Mark 16:1 and 2, when the Sabbath was passed, very early in the morning, the 1st day of the week, is when the people began to come to his tomb.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's one big question that a hurdle that we must get over if we're going to believe in a Wednesday crucifixion. And I wrote an article on this for our March magazine, and this is what I said. I'm not opposed to Wednesday crucifixion, but the argument for Wednesday is not clear-cut. For example, if Jesus was crucified on Wednesday, why did the women prepare spices and wait day after day after day before coming to anoint him for proper burial? Considering the logistics from Wednesday evening until Sunday morning, his body would experience considerable corruption. As it was in the case of Lazarus, the stench of rotting flesh would have made opening the tomb inadvisable. And so, Gary, this is the big problem. If Jesus was crucified on Wednesday, why did they wait that long? That's really 4 days, you know.
Yeah, and what Mark said, the day before the Sabbath. Now, which Sabbath are we talking about here? I've heard 2 explanations there. That one is the regular Sabbath, which occurred on that Saturday, and the other would be a special Sabbath, meaning the high holy day itself.
Yes. However, Luke puts it this way. He said, and he was a physician, by the way. He said that the women saw how the body was laid, Luke 23:55, then left the sepulchre, prepared spices and ointments, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment, Luke 23:56. What commandment would that be? That would have to be the commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, concerning the regular Sabbath. I don't find a commandment about some high holy Sabbath.
Okay, and so essentially he was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, but it was not a Wednesday event that we're talking about.
Now, it can be very easy for him to have been put in the grave Friday evening and rise again early Sunday morning. Otherwise, he would have seen corruption of some kind. But the psalmist wrote that he would see no corruption. And on the day of Pentecost, Peter spoke that he would see no corruption. And in fact, that he did not see corruption. Well, there's more about this. We'll tell you about it when we come back in just a moment. The Bible tells us in Acts chapter 2, verse 27, Peter preaching on the day of Pentecost, he, that is David, seeing this before, spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in hell, neither his flesh did see corruption. That's in Acts 2:31. And of course, this was quoted from Psalm 16:10, which says, Thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. And again in Acts chapter 13, verse 37, But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. Only a resurrection within 36 to 40 hours could have prevented a massive breakdown of cell structure in the body. Beyond that time, the likelihood of decay would spread rapidly. Is, to me, makes for a Friday crucifixion, Gary, in spite of all that we might tinker with.
Now, the way John 20 begins is, first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene, early when it was yet dark. She came, J.R. That tomb was sealed by the Romans, by the way. And she came before daybreak with a purpose. And purpose seems to have been to come back and to complete the burial process by permission or previous arrangement with the Romans.
Yes, now the other Gospels tell a slightly different story, and so we need to look at this and decide exactly what happened here. According to Luke's account, Dr. Luke, a physician, said that that the group consisted of Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other women that were with them. And Mark puts it this way. He says, Now when Jesus was risen early in the morning, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. Now, Matthew says that there is an other Mary, the other Mary. And Mark tells us that this was Mary, the mother of James, and adds that Salome also came. And then Luke wrote that there was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women that were with him. Now, even when they get to the tomb, there are different stories here. So what it looks like is these women put the spices together, and they were to meet at the tomb. They didn't all get together and come to the tomb. They were to meet at the tomb. Well, Mary Magdalene was the first one to arrive, and she arrived alone. Later then, we have others who came and saw a single angel, and then possibly a third group showed up and saw 2 angels that told them that Jesus was resurrected. So this appears to be, to me, a consistent story. There were actually 3 arrivals of the women who were going to meet at the tomb. And so we have the story of each group.
But it's very important to remember that if this were, 42, 46 hours down the line, a long time, they wouldn't have waited that long to come. They wanted to come back as soon as possible to complete the burial process. And no doubt it was done by prior arrangement. This was the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and arrangements had to be made to open the tomb. So I'm sure they were coming back with that purpose in the morning early. And then comes something interesting, that the tomb's open.
The tomb is open. She looks in. She sees that he's gone, but there's nobody there. Nobody tells her. She does not receive an announcement. She goes back and tells Peter and John that somebody has stolen the body. John and Peter then run to the tomb. John stops outside the tomb. By the way, he calls himself in the third person, that other disciple.
Yes.
I think that shows his humility here.
Indeed, it does.
He stops outside the tomb. Why? I think because of the ritual purity necessary in those days. You see, even though this was the day of first fruits, the week of unleavened bread was far from over. And so he did not want to contaminate himself with touching something that had been contaminated, like a dead body or something of that nature. So he stops outside the tomb. Peter goes on in. He sees this remarkable thing inside. Gary, he sees the shroud lying where the body lay under it.
Yes.
But the napkin that was over the face on top of the shroud was removed, folded, and laid aside very neatly in a place by itself. This says something to me. It's possible, Gary, that John had seen Jesus fold cloths in such a fashion, and perhaps it convinced him that only Jesus could have folded that cloth. We're not told for sure, but it's interesting that it does say the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. This said something special to Peter and John.
And you know, in the Greek, that napkin is called sudarion, which in Greek means a sweat cloth, or sometimes used as a headband. But J.R., there is in historical existence, and it has a long provenance, a piece of cloth called the sudarion of Oviedo, which has been in Spain for hundreds of years and supposedly dates back really to this event.
And it does not have the same image that the Shroud of Turin has on it, but it does have the same bloodstains.
Exactly, the bloodstains match.
Yes,
yeah.
The bloodstains match with the bloodstains that seeped through the linen shroud onto this sudarion. And so to me that's fascinating, that Jesus would have risen again and have removed the napkin and folded it neatly and put it in a place by itself. Fascinating. Gary, they must have seen some things there, because it says the disciples went away believing. It says here in verse 8, then went also that other disciple which first came to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. What did he believe, you see? They said they as yet knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. And then the disciples went away into their own home. So if they didn't know the scriptures that he should rise from the dead, what did they believe? To me, it's possible that he saw the spices still outlining the body.
J.R., there had to be a wondrous appearance here. There had to be an arrangement to all this that would let them know at a glance that he left these artifacts behind just as they had been wrapped around his body, and in that instant they believed that he had risen from the dead.
If someone had stolen the body, they would have taken the shroud, they would have taken, because his body was wrapped in that shroud,
yes.
They would have taken the headband, or else they would have just pulled it out and thrown it over, disheveled, in a place across the tomb. It's obvious here that these disciples saw something supernatural.
They did. Now, we move quickly, and we're running out of time. This is a great story. Christ appears to Mary Magdalene, and J.R., she's standing there, she's weeping, and we have here the account of her seeing two angels in white sitting, the one at the head, the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And then comes that remarkable event where she meets the Savior.
Yes. She looks in and sees angels, and they say, who are you looking for? She doesn't even give them time to explain, like they explained to the other women.
Right.
She must have been very frenetic about this time, just really hyper. She turned away, and she saw Jesus there, thought he was the gardener. And, I guess burying her head in her hands, she said, if you'll tell him where you took him, I'll go get him. And then he said, Mary. But that was a calming effect upon her. that just calmed her nerves. And when she saw him, she realized it was him. And she, I guess, fell down at his feet, wanted to hold his feet or something. He said, "Don't touch me, I have not yet ascended to my Father." Why would he say that, Gary?
Well, that's been the source of many a sermon, but J.R., he's at this point carrying the weight of the world, and he's going to ascend to the Father to make his appearance in the temple of heaven.
Yes. And it's possible, in my opinion, that he was about to do that. I don't think he spent 40 days earthbound, before he went to heaven. I think he was in and out of heaven all during that time.
Yes.
So it's a fascinating study, and we'll have more to say about it on our next broadcast. We'll be back in just a moment. You know, this 20th chapter has so many good things in it. We have not been able to cover nearly enough, so we'll be doing more on this on our next broadcast, and you'll not want to miss it. But Gary, I do want to come down to this interesting statement, the last two verses. He said, "Many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name." And so I implore you to believe. This is the chapter for believing.
It is the chapter for believing. You know, doubters say that Jesus never died. He swooned, he fainted, and then he came to a few hours later. John chapter 20 proves that he died. He was absolutely dead, and his disciples regarded it as miraculous when he arose.
Yeah, so trust him today. This is J.R. Church and Gary Sturman. Until next time, keep looking up.